Good. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second program in the Learn to Hunt Waterfowl series. My name is Ken Duran, and this is John.
How's it going?
We're going to start it out today. Before we actually get into the program, I want to let everyone know that we are recording this, and it will be available to later if you aren't able to watch all of it or miss something. We'll also be taking any questions. If you have any, feel free to type those into the chat. And with that, I think we're ready to get started. So again, my name is Ken Duran. I'm the Game Bird Section Supervisor with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I've been waterfowl hunting since a little kid. Actually, this was kind of my introduction to hunting. This is my dog, Jersey, on the screen. He's more of an upland bird dog, but I do bring him out waterfowl hunting.
My name's John Feltovic. I'm a videographer editor here with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And like Ken, I've been hunting since I was a little kid. My dad started taking me when I was probably about 5 years old, and waterfowl hunting was my introduction to hunting. And I've loved it ever since. It's taken me to some pretty cool places. But my dog there, his name's Rook. He's 7 years old, and the best hunting partner that I could get. So he's always a pleasure to have.
All right, thanks, John. So today's program is going to be focusing on ducks, more specifically a group of ducks that we call puddle ducks or dabblers. We're focusing on these puddle ducks because they are the most harvested species in Pennsylvania. The number one and number two most harvested duck in Pennsylvania is the mallard and the wood duck specifically. But also puddle ducks are just easier to get into as a new waterfowl hunter. They require a whole lot less equipment and less skill and knowledge. It's just much easier for people to pick up hunting many of these ducks. So let's start with biology. Male and female ducks, puddle ducks, look differently. It's most extreme in wood duck, as you can see in the top picture of this slide. Very big differences in what a male and female looks like. Generally, males are more vibrant and colorful than the females, but for some species, it can be more subtle, something like a black duck. You may not notice immediate obvious differences between a male and female. For habitat, ducks use water, and you can find them in water throughout the state. Roosting sites, you'll find them in ponds, rivers, marshes, wetlands. Most places around the state, you can usually find a duck or two. I think most people are familiar with seeing mallards in like local parks and things like that. So the roosting sites are fairly easy to find. It's a matter of just looking at different wetland sites. Feeding sites are much more limited, and it's limited because of the biology of these ducks. So the first thing that these ducks are looking for when they're feeding are seeds and then insects that live underwater. From the seeds, it's mostly seeds from wetland plants. That's most of what they eat year-round, especially during the hunting season. But you'll also find them using grain fields and eating things like corn that is left on the ground. So hunting these ducks out of fields is definitely something that can be done, and a lot of people do. But again, most of their feed are seeds, and specifically late into the waterfowl season, the seeds that they're eating are at the bottom of the water, down in the mud. And so this is where it becomes limiting. Apparently we're still stuck in a picture of a dog. Might be a little delay.
Yeah.
So going back to how they feed is why it's a little more limiting to find feeding sites. All the puddle ducks feed from the surface of the water. And you'll see ducks in water. You often see them with their butts facing straight up in the air and their heads underwater. That's them reaching down as far as they can get to get food underneath the water. So that's a limiting factor. Something like a mallard can only feed to about 16 inches, whereas smaller ducks like teal, you're really looking at the 6 to 12 inches. So when you're looking for feeding sites for ducks, think shallow water, because they have to be able to reach the food that's at the bottom in the mud and in the vegetation that's underneath it. We'll move now into regulations. There are 3 types of licenses that you need to hunt ducks in Pennsylvania. The first is just your general hunting license. The second is a migratory game bird license. And when you buy this license, you're going to be asked a series of questions about what migratory birds you hunted the previous year. Make sure you answer these questions. These are really important for us to help us set regulations and monitor harvest of ducks across the country. So it's very important that you answer these questions. If you are buying a license in person at a store, make sure the person selling you that license asks you those questions. And then the last thing you need is a federal duck stamp. These are available online, and when you do that, you're going to get a temporary duck stamp, and they will mail you the physical one. You can use that temporary duck stamp until you receive the physical one. So if you were asked to go hunting at 9 o'clock at night by a buddy to go out hunting the next morning, don't worry about actually going and finding a physical federal duck stamp. You can buy it online and use that electronic duck stamp to go out. For arms and ammunition, you're looking at shotguns, 10 gauge or less, and they can only hold 3 shells at once. That's the maximum. So that would be 1 in the chamber and 2 in the magazine. Now, most shotguns can fit more than 2 shells in a magazine. So you need to find some sort of plug. It can be a dowel rod or a commercially available plug that you can put in there to limit the capacity of your magazine. If you don't do this, you're going to get in trouble if you get checked by law enforcement. So make sure that your shotgun can only hold 3 shells. You're using non-toxic shot, maximum size of T, but for most ducks, you're not going to be using something that big. It's going to be something much smaller. Legal hunting hours. It starts half an hour before sunrise and goes until sunset. In our regulations book, I have one right here in front of me. If you go to page 45, you can see the dates, the chart with dates that defines when your legal hunting hours are based off of where you are in the state and what week you are in the season. Pennsylvania is divided into 4 duck hunting zones, and each of those zones have different duck season dates. So right now, the only place you can legally duck hunt in Pennsylvania is up in our northwest duck zone. And in the north zone, we're going to be opening up on November 14th. And in the Lake Erie zone, we're opening up on November 6th. Again, make sure you refer to your hunting digest for specifics on that when you're looking at where you want to go. Yeah, so daily bag limit is 6 ducks total. Some species have more specific daily bag limits, and we'll get into those a little bit later, but the total is 6 ducks. And you can have in your possession 3 times the daily bag limit. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Check your regulations booklet for specifics on any duck season.
So now we'll get into like how to positively ID some of the ducks that you're going to encounter when you head out to hunt. And we'll start with the wood ducks. So the limit on wood ducks is 3 currently. So that's 3 drakes or females, correct? You can shoot any combination of the 3. So you can shoot 2 drakes and a hen, all drakes, all hens, doesn't matter, just 3 wood ducks. Wood ducks have a very distinct whistling noise that can come in variations in the way that they make them, but it's a very high-pitched, distinct noise when you hear them flying, or if they're on the water feeding or just kind of hanging out with each other. They have something to kind of tell them apart in flight, especially at first light when it's kind of darker out. First they fly a lot faster than, say, like a mallard or a black duck or your bigger ducks, and their body is much more slender than a mallard will be, and their tail it's a little bit longer than a mallard and kind of still on that like stubby kind of look to it. But they're, to mainly tell them apart, is they fly much faster and their body is a lot more slender than what a mallard would be. Go ahead. And then to mallards, so the daily limit on those is 4, no more than 2 hens. So you can shoot 2 hens and 2 drakes, 3 hens, 1 drake, or
Not
all
3 hens.
three drakes, 1 hen, or all 4 of them can be drakes. And a good way to tell them apart, obviously, from each other, the drakes, like the wood ducks, are much more vibrant in color than the hens. The green head, specifically on the drakes, versus the hens, were mainly all brown except for a little bit of a speculum on the wing. They'll fly a little bit slower than a wood duck. The hens will make that distinct quacking noise that a duck is going to make, and the drakes actually, early in the morning, if you can hear the drake and the hen kind of talking to each other, the drake has like a whistling, like a deep whistle noise that it'll make, versus the hen quacking. The drake's actually not going to make a quacking sound. He's going to make like a deep whistling noise that's going to like kind of drag out while he's making it. Let's see if I have any other slide on those. So positively identifying black ducks. So the limit is 2 on them, and that's drakes or hens. The difference between a drake and a hen black duck is hard to tell on the wing, but once you can get close to them or get one in your hand, the difference, to be able to tell the difference between the 2 of them, is in the bill mainly. So the drake on a black duck, the bill is going to be that like yellow all the way throughout the bill, and then that little bit of black on the tip, just like a mallard, just like a drake mallard. They have the same exact bill as a drake mallard. And then on a hen black duck, the bill is going to be more of like an olive green color versus that vibrant yellow color of the drake. So the hen has that olive green color, and it'll have like some black speculums, like a hen mallard would have on her bill. She'll have some black spots here and there, or a little bit like more solid black colors on the bill in that olive tone to it as well. And another way, their the speculum on their wing is more of like a purple green color, and a little bit of blue in there. And then 2, a good way to tell them apart early in the morning, especially, that I've found over the years hunting them a lot, is that the underside of a black duck's wing is going to contrast to its body a lot more. So that white underneath his wing is going to pop a lot more than it would, say, on a mallard, where it's going to blend into its body a little bit more. So that's a way to kind of tell the difference, maybe at first light, when you can't really see exactly what the duck could be, if it's a mallard or a black duck. A good way to tell is that the underside of the wing, as you can see when they're coming in, is a lot more, that white is going to pop a lot more than a mallard's will. And then here too, once you get the bird in hand, so to being able to differentiate between a black duck and a mallard, mainly with the hens, I've seen this a lot with hen mallards that we've shot that were a lot darker in color than some other hen mallards that we've shot. And we've been trying to decipher whether it was a black duck or a mallard. The way to tell the difference on that is the top photo is a black duck, and the difference you can see on that versus the mallard is the mallard has that white bard on the top and the bottom of its wing speculum. So that's a good way to tell once you get that bird in hand. If you're unsure if it's a black duck or a mallard hen, in that darker colored mallard hens that you'll get sometimes, if you look at the wing speculum, you can see that white bar on the top and the bottom, and that's a dead giveaway for it to be a mallard versus a black duck.
Actually, I want to just jump back here to mallards and black ducks. So these two species do interbreed, and you can get hybrids of mallards and black ducks. So that often brings some question of, well, which one does that count towards my bag? And so the general recommendation is whatever that bird looks most like, that's what you should count it as towards your bag. So if it's a mallard black duck hybrid that mostly looks like a mallard, count it as a mallard. If it's a hybrid that mostly look like a black duck, count it as a black duck. We do realize there's a lot of gray areas in this, and so our officers take that into consideration when checking people, that there is overlap and it can be hard to determine which one it should go to. But you're going to be safe if you just count it as what it looks like the most. All right, we'll jump into some of the other ducks that are commonly harvested in Pennsylvania. The next two are two different types of teal, blue wing and green wing teal. Blue wing teal are some of our earliest migrants in the state, and so they're typically moving through in September. There's a few that are hanging on around like for the early parts of the duck season, and those are really easy to identify. They have blue on the uppermost part of their wings. That's very, very easy to see when they're on the wing, when they're flying around. That blue really stands out. And then their face kind of has like a crescent moon type shape to the front of their face, right behind their bill. The other teal is a green wing teal. It's the speculum or the coloring on its wing is green. And then for the males, the head is red with like a strip of green going across the back of its head. Both of these are really small ducks. They're going to look much, much smaller than a mallard or a wood duck. So if you see a group of really small ducks flying in, it's most likely teal. Daily bag limits for these are 6. So you can shoot your entire bag limit with just teal. Next up are pintails. This is a species where the daily bag limit is 1. So you want to make sure if you harvest a pintail, you want to make sure that you won't shoot another one. These are going to look like really big ducks. They're actually, with that tail, that sharp point of the tail sticking out, they're going to look like they're longer than mallards. So it's a really big duck. They have a really long neck, and then that sharp point on the tail is the best way to ID them from the air. And if you notice the top picture for the pintail, you can see that its wings have a big white bar going across the bottom. And that can be easy to see too, but I think the biggest ID when they're in the air is notice that tail and that long neck. Next is the American widgeon. This one can sometimes be confused for green wing teal because it also has a green stripe going along its head, but it's a bigger duck. They're often mixed in with other ducks, and you can see looking at that picture that the coloration on the bottom of the wing is darker and white is on top, which is kind of flipped from what the northern pintail looks like. For these, the daily bag limit is 6. Next up, kind of a duck that doesn't look like a lot. They're often called gray ducks, but it's gadwall. These really don't have a lot of coloring. They're going to look a lot like a hen mallard from a distance. But when you get them in hand, or if you do get a good view of the wing, that white patch at the bottom of their wing really stands out when they're flying. You can see that on the picture of the right. Daily bag limit of these is 6, so you can harvest a full bag limit with just gadwalls. Gadwalls, pintails, widgeons are not super common ducks in Pennsylvania, but they are one of the more common out there. And that's kind of it for ID, I believe.
Mhm.
The last thing to cover with that is duck ID can be very intimidating, and a lot of people are concerned about that. And I just want people to keep in mind we have species limits, and really no duck that you're going to encounter in Pennsylvania you can't harvest any of. So if you're early in the morning hunting and you're not exactly sure of the idea of a duck when it's coming in, you're going to be safe to be able to shoot that duck and then identify it when it's in hand. And then you'll know what you can or can't shoot going forward. So don't get too concerned about identifying ducks on the wing. It is important. We want you to get there eventually. But if you pay attention to regulations and your bag limits, you can be pretty safe out there with limited knowledge of your duck identification.
So now we'll jump into some tips of how to get started. Big thing getting started into waterfowl hunting is finding people or mentors or people who could take you out and kind of show you the ropes of how to waterfowl hunt. Waterfowl hunting can be um, pretty intimidating if you're on YouTube or something like that, figuring out what you need or how to get started or this and that. You'll have a lot of people out there telling you that you need all kinds of decoys and all kinds of calls and everything else. And it's very important to get out there and just try it. If you have the ability to do it yourself, that's great. But having a mentor or people in your area that are avid waterfowl hunters themselves, getting with them and having them kind of take you under their wing and being a part of that group so that you can learn from people who have been doing it for a year or several years or for a very, very long time. And you can end up learning a lot very quickly using that method of hunting with people that have been doing it for a long time and finding those mentors and um, other people to hunt with. Patterning your gun is very important. This is very important because um, you need to do your best in harvesting these birds as quickly and as cleanly as possible. So knowing the limitations of your shotgun and what shells pattern the best out of it at what distances is going to be huge for you, because then you know your limitations of what shots you should be taking and what shots you shouldn't be taking, just so that you can stay as ethical as possible when you're out there hunting. Scouting a lot is going to be huge to understanding why ducks and waterfowl in general do what they do and when they do them. And the more you can understand that, the better of a hunter you're going to become in the long run. And being a respectful hunter, no matter where you are, whether that's state game lands or private lands, um, it's just always good to leave places better than you found them and be respectful to other hunters that are in the area. And again, whether that's on private or public land. Um, Usually, if you're on public land and you run into somebody and you hunt public land a lot, you're bound to run into them again um, in that area. So being respectful and finding some common ground between other hunters can also lead to openings to hunt other places, and building friendships with people that you meet out there in the woods, and could allow you to, end up hunting together with these people and opening your opportunities into more waterfowl hunting in the future. Some equipment. We kind of touched on this with the earlier with the shotgun and non-toxic shot. Using blinds, so that could be natural blinds on private land, getting some sort of mobile chair to take with you that you can sit on a stool in the marsh or something like that. Panel blinds, if you're hunting in a field or in water, you can walk those in on the private land, public land, and you can use that as a mobile blind to hunt behind. And then you just have to take that out with you if that's something that you're going to take into public land. And then layout blinds are mainly going to be used if you're hunting in a field or along the edge of water where there's dry land, that you can set those layout blinds up.
John, what size shot do you typically use for ducks?
Typically, I use a 20 gauge bismuth 4-shot. That's what I shoot for ducks all throughout the year. I can shoot. I'll usually go between 4s or 5s, but I'll typically stick with 4-shot. That's the shot that I've found, again, that patterns the best with my gun and my choke tube combination that I have out to about 40 yards. Now, I've shot 2s. 2s is a good size shot if you're shooting steel or bismuth, anything like that. But 2s is a good steel size shot to shoot for ducks, especially later in the year. Steel shot, that little bit of extra size tends to help later in the year when those ducks have a little bit more fat on them and a little bit denser feathers.
Mm-hmm. And then early in the season with teal, even size 6 and or 4 steel works really well because they're smaller ducks.
Yep, definitely. Equipment to get started. So you want to start mainly with your floater decoys. That's 98% of where you're going to be probably doing your duck hunting when you first start out is going to be on the water. So having some floater decoys to start out, if you can get anywhere between half a dozen to a dozen, that's a good, start for most places that you're going to be hunting on small water or little marshes or swamps, stuff like that. And then there's also mojos that you can throw into the mix. Those are great early on in the year and in the fields as well. I've found that wood ducks and teal respond very well to a mojo, especially early on in the year. That's a big it's something that's going to really catch their eye. And wood ducks and teal, mallards in general, those kind of ducks, they go a lot off of movement when they're looking for a spot to go. So when they see that natural motion of a duck landing somewhere, that's going to grab their attention and make them want to come in and either take a look and give you a close shot or actually land in the decoys. And something that's very important, I think, that sometimes gets overlooked by a lot of hunters and even by myself sometimes, is a jerk string. And this is something that the cable is going to be about anywhere between 20 to 30 yards long, depending upon the length will vary in brands that you buy. And it'll have 4 clips on it that you can clip 4 or 6 or 2 decoys to, however many you want to clip on there, that it has the ability to clip to it. And then there's an anchor on the back end and an elastic cord that stretches from the anchor to the line. So that way, when you attach the decoys to the line and you go back to your blind, you can pull on that cord and it'll simulate ducks splashing around and feeding in the water and create that very realistic motion in the water and muddy up the water. Especially if you're in shallow water, that's huge. When you look at things from a bird's eye view, when you see live ducks in the water, especially shallow water, the water's rippling a lot. There's always something going on. There's always some sort of movement going on. And when they're actively really feeding in an area in shallow water, that water is going to be super muddy, and they're going to be churning up all that mud underneath the water. And that's something that a jerk cord can simulate for ducks in the air. When they see those ducks creating that splashing in the water and churning up that mud underneath, and it just makes it look that much more realistic to them to come and take a look. And then you can have field decoys if you're hunting in any sort of dry field, or in super shallow water, something like that. You have silhouette decoys, like in the picture right here. And you can also get full bodies to put out as well. And those work great as a little bit of confidence. Mainly when you're hunting in a field, what I've found to be the most effective is using mojos. Now, mainly I do a lot of my duck hunting I do while I'm goose hunting in a field. So I'll have out a goose spread, and then I'll put anywhere from 2 to 4 mojos out in the goose decoys. And sometimes I'll use field decoys. Sometimes I won't, but I've found that the mojos are really what is going to make you a lot more successful in a field, versus not having one out in a field. If you have anything else
Yeah,
about that?
if you're also wanting to harvest geese, make sure you have the ability to turn off those spinning wings, because geese tend not to they tend to get a little spooked by those.
Yeah, there's definitely, yeah, I can definitely think of times that's has happened. Most mojo companies sell remotes for the majority of the mojos that they sell, to where you can set it on a timer where it'll run like an intermittent wing spin, or it'll run a constant, or you can set the remote from a distance back from the blind where you can actually turn the mojo off from the blind, so that you're not having to go out there and turn it off while geese might be coming in. Calling. So for calls to get started, so there's the 2 main calls here in the photo that you're going to use specifically for hunting, communicating with mallards or big ducks in general. These 2 are going to simulate what a mallard or a black duck will sound like. And you have 2 types here. So you have a single reed and a double reed. So the single reed, you're going to be able to get a lot louder on than you would the double reed. The double reed, you can get a lot softer. I like to use a double reed when I'm in close quarters or in areas that have a lot of maybe a lot of trees around, or you're in a small area that isn't as open, and you need to be a little bit quieter, and you don't need that sound to carry as much, because it's gonna echo a little bit more with those when you're in a wooded area. And your single reeds are good, especially if you're hunting in a field or in wide open areas, big water, stuff like that. It allows you to reach out there and be a little bit more boisterous and get the attention of birds that might be at a further distance for yourself. And a good tip on if you're trying to figure out which type of call you want to choose is that it's you can make a loud call soft, but it's harder to make a soft call loud. So that's a good rule of thumb that I try and tell myself when I'm in a hunting situation, or if people are trying to figure out what type of call is best for them to use and to start out with. Another tip: less is more with calling, especially at ducks. Sometimes, especially late in the year, where you can run into birds that are very call shy if they've been, especially if you're hunting public land. Ducks get called at a lot on public land, so learning how to figure out what they're wanting to hear, whether they probably don't want to hear as much calling versus late in the year versus earlier in the year, when you might be able to get away with a little bit of more calling to them, and learning how to call at ducks on the wing and communicating to them is something that's very important too. And that kind of goes right into the second tip of going online and watching video tutorials of some reputable people, how to learn how to call at ducks, and what sounds to make and when to make them. And placement of calls in relation to your decoys is not the most important thing to pay attention to when you're out duck hunting, but you definitely don't want to be so far away from your decoys that when you're calling, the ducks are confused as to where that sound's coming from versus where the decoys are set up. And then they may end up, landing in a totally different area than where you had wanted them to go. So being relatively close to your setup when you're hunting ducks, especially on water, is very important. And another call that isn't up here is that I find myself using a lot late in the year on pressured birds is a drake whistle. Now that's something, that type of call will make the sound that a drake mallard's going to make. It'll make the sound that a pintail is going to make. Teal, widgeon, you can get a lot of different variations of sounds out of that drake whistle, but learning how to use one is something that can be a very effective tool late in the year when ducks on public land and private land too have maybe heard you calling and hitting them with a quack and a mallard call the whole year and the whole season, and then that's just something that you can throw in there as a little bit of a change up to them, a little bit more confidence to build in their mind of like, hey, this is something different than we've heard before. Let's go check it out. Equipment that's very important to have for duck hunting specifically is waterproof clothing or waders. You're going to be in areas, like I said before, 98% of the time your duck hunting is going to be in or very close to water. And having waders and waterproof clothing to be prepared for those conditions is something that's important, because you may have to walk out into the water to set up your decoys or to retrieve birds. And if you have on, muck boots or something like that, it may not be enough to be able to successfully retrieve those birds, unless you have a dog, of course. But even then, more often than not, you're going to be the one out setting your decoys early in the morning. And it's never fun when you're walking around in what you think is shallow enough water with muck boots and you step in a hole and over goes the water into your boots and 30 degrees and now your feet are frozen, and that's never fun. So and then when you're on a boat, it is required, if hunting from a boat from November 1st to April 30th, that you are wearing a life vest. And that's just something that you should be wearing all the time when you're on a boat, not just when you're hunting in cold water. That life vest is going to save your life, especially if you go into the water in cold water. Every second matters when you're dealing with extremely cold water late into the winter. If you go in, that life vest is gonna help you get back to safety a lot quicker than versus if you didn't have one on. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think a life vest is good practice anytime you're wading as well. You step into a deep hole that you didn't realize was there. It's helpful to have a life vest. I've been in a couple of situations where one where I wasn't wearing a life vest and I got right up to the tip of my waders and it was pretty scary. So having that life vest when you're out there wading is beneficial, even if you're not in a boat.
Yeah, a good place is, now that you mentioned that, people who hunt tidal waters or big water, river systems, any sort of moving water, something like that, where it's, you may slip on a rock and out from under your feet you come and you go down into the water and you're starting to float downstream. It's definitely would be beneficial to have a life jacket on, even if you're not in a boat, as something to keep you above water while you're on those types of bodies of water hunting. finding places where you can hunt. If you want to go ahead and touch on those.
Yeah. So one of the things I do is look for wetlands. So I do this through, you can go online. We have a map for all of our game lands where you can see where our game lands are. If you look at aerial photos, you can typically find where there are wetlands. Those are good places to look. We have a lot of wetlands that we manage in the state for ducks. So lots of places on game lands, but also state forests, state parks, private lands. Use apps or websites that are out there that can tell you the contact who owns what private land. So that gives you an idea of who you can start going and looking to ask. You want to say anything else on that?
No, only thing I would add to that is being respectful to other people. You know, when you're out there on anywhere, whether that's state parks, game lands, state forests, private lands, and then always asking for permission to hunt private lands. It's a good way to, you know, when one farmer figures out that you're, you know, good people or a good person and that you're respectful to their property, you're going to start to see yourself gaining a lot more access to other ground because farmers talk a lot amongst each other. It's a very tight knit community, and they're going to talk to each other about about people who might be hunting their property and if they're treating it properly. And if you are that type of person that's treating property the way it should be, you're going to gain access to more places just through that, and through farmers talking to each other and telling them that, hey, you know, this guy or girl is a good person. You know, they treat my land respectfully and my wishes on my land respectfully. So I don't see a reason that you should be worried about them hunting your property, and then that can just start to snowball for you and gain a lot more access to private property in your area.
Yeah, and developing a good relationship with those private landowners, they can tell you where to hunt. Like if you see a property you think looks good and they give you permission, they're probably going to tell you like, oh yeah, I always see geese landing in this spot, or the ducks always come in at this time of day. So use those as resources is in your scouting. And then the other really neat opportunity that we have in Pennsylvania occur at two of our state game lands, Middle Creek Wildlife Area in the southeast, and Pymatuning Wildlife Area up in the northwest. We have controlled duck hunting areas and blinds set up for people. So we limit the access hunting only a few days a week, and only a certain number of people allowed to hunt at a time. This keeps that hunting, keeps those ducks and geese around, reduces pressure. It makes for really fun hunts and easy hunts, especially for new people getting into it. Find out more information from that. Either contact those areas, call them up. You can find their numbers on our website, or we have places on our website with all the detail regulations specific to how you can hunt a Middle Creek and Pymatuning. So those are great places to look into. Find our website, call them up. Again, the hunting there is really pretty high quality, and a great place to start if you're new to waterfowl hunting.
So scouting tips, finding where the birds are roosting or loafing is going to be the first thing that I usually try and figure out, because from there you can follow them to where they're going to feed. Ducks early in the year are sometimes they'll come off of water and they'll go right to other water systems to feed. Early in the year, they're going to be keying in on those aquatic invertebrates or flooded grasses, stuff like that, that they can stay in that water and feed, and be comfortable in those kinds of areas. And using maps like Onyx or Base Map or some other stuff that's out there to find potential spots. I can't tell you how many places I found that were those little hidden away water sloughs or little ponds back in secluded in some trees that ended up being honey holes for me early in the year and even late into the year. Considering the time of day, ducks are mainly going to be a lot more active first light early in the morning, to about mid-morning ish. But that first light early morning time is when you're going to see the majority of your duck activity. And then later in the afternoon, on warmer days, it's going to be more either right around sunset or much after sunset is when you're going to start seeing those ducks starting to move on warmer days. So that plays into watching the weather. The colder it is in the afternoon, the earlier they're going to move in the afternoons. So if you get a day, typically what I see out of duck habits over the years is that once that temperature starts to drop down to like freezing or below, you'll start to see those ducks moving in the afternoons more before legal shooting hours than when it's not that cold and they're moving kind of right at legal light or after, which gives you no opportunity really to hunt them in the afternoons, wherever you may be, whether that's on water or in a field. Whenever it's really cold, I always do really good on ducks in the fields. That's when they're going to start to head out to the fields to search for those foods that are going to be more impactful for them when it's colder out, like corn and soybeans and stuff like that. Mainly corn are the types of fields you'll see them hit when it gets really cold outside. And then early in the mornings, when the weather is cold, if you have a sunny day, typically ducks are going to move well before shooting light into a field, typically. So there's not much of an option to hunt them that I've found that's beneficial to me in a field early in the morning on sunny days, when it's cold or warm, typically. Now, on the flip side of that, if it's raining or snowing or some sort of inclement weather like that, I've found it beneficial to hunt them in the mornings and in the afternoons on days like that, because that cloud cover is going to make it a lot darker in the mornings and it's going to push their flight time back into the morning a lot further. And it opens up that window for you to be able to get to where they're going. And being there right when they get there instead of being there and then they show up 15 to 20 minutes before legal light on a sunny day, versus when there's a lot of cloud cover, it's going to be darker later into the morning. So that's going to push their feed time back just a little bit, and that gives you the opportunity to kind of hunt them in the field. And two, I've noticed when it's raining or snowing or something like that, they'll actually spend a lot more time in the fields throughout the day, versus when it's sunny bluebird day out. They'll feed in the morning and then they'll feed in the afternoon, early in the morning, and then in the afternoon sometime, versus when it's raining or snowing, they'll have a little bit more of a drawn out feed throughout the morning. They'll kind of jump back and forth between water and food throughout the morning, as long as that rain and snow is still going. And investing in a good pair of binoculars is huge. Being able to spot birds from a distance and not being intrusive on their feed patterns is huge. You don't want to go into a spot that they're feeding at and walk up on them and you bump them out of there, and then you kind of might have messed yourself up for that next morning. So being able to sit back and watch birds from a distance with a good pair of binoculars is going to be beneficial to your scouting as well. Picking a good location to hunt. Hunting the X is going to be where the ducks are feeding or loafing. And that's your preferred hunting spot because you know that they're going to be coming there at some point, whether that be, early in the morning, mid morning, sometime in the afternoon. Those are the places you really want to key in on to hunt. Those are going to be the places where you're going to be the most successful, the most often, as long as, you cross your T's and dot your I's with everything else that you're doing while you're out there. But a big thing with that comes is not hunting roost sites and putting pressure on birds on their roost sites is not going to be beneficial for you in the long run. You're eventually just going to push them out of the area, and you're going to go out scouting one day after hunting the roost site a couple times, and you're going to be wondering why there's not any more ducks in your area, even though the weather's been the same and the patterns aren't any different. And you're going to be going, why aren't there any ducks or geese in the area? Well, that's could be because if you're hunting the roost site, you've pushed them out of there and they've now found a new place to go. So you've got to restart everything that you've been doing and find that roost site and figure out where they're going all over again. Hunting traffic on ducks can be tricky and be a little bit more difficult than that of geese. Now, traffic is being in a spot between where they're coming from and where they're going. Now, whether that means you're hunting them on a water loaf spot that's in between their feed field and their roost site that they're going back and forth to, or if you're hunting them in a field that might be in between their roost site and the feed field that they're going to, you might, utilizing decoys in a situation like that on the X or on traffic, utilizing decoys is going to be very important. But especially when you're hunting traffic, you're going to want to utilize, maybe throw a couple more spinners out than you would on a spot that you're going to be hunting traffic, or throw some more full bodies out or some more floaters out or whatever decoys that you're using, just to add a little bit more confidence to them that says, hey, we need to be down there today feeding instead of where we're going. And this too, hunting traffic areas might take a little bit more calling than say on an X, where you're trying to pull them off of that place that they're trying to go versus already being there and they're coming to you in their mind, versus you having to pull them away from the spot that they have in their mind of where they want to go to feed or loaf for that day. Weather conditions, kind of touched on this before. I've noticed that the worse the weather conditions get, the better my duck hunting has been. Some of my best days have been in driving rain or driving snow conditions, and we've absolutely had lights out hunts in those conditions, in the fields and on water. I mean, super cold days I found are the best for hunting ducks in field situations. They will start to come off their roost or loaf sites earlier in the afternoons. You'll start to see them move a lot earlier before legal shooting hours, and that just gives you more of an opportunity to kind of get after them in a field situation versus trying to find water that's open that you may not even be able to get to because it might just be a big water spot that hasn't froze up yet that they're keeping open, and you don't want to hunt that anyways. Sunny bluebird days are good places, good days to hunt water. I've found, unless it's super cold out, then you can kind of hunt them in the afternoons. But sunny bluebird days, hunting them on water, that's always a good, choice to go to 90% of the time, is, to hunt in an area that has ducks, and hunting them on water is a good plan to go to no matter the weather conditions. I don't know if you have any
And I
points
think
you
that
would
covers
have
it.
for that?
The only other thing I would say is you aren't going to harvest a duck if you're not hunting.
Yep.
So
Can't
hunt when you
get them on the
can.
couch. That's what I always say. Can't get them on the couch.
Yeah.
So, hunting tips and tactics for time of the year. Early on in the year, October, they're going to be keying in on on those areas. You're going to be dealing with teal and mainly wood ducks and maybe some resident mallards in the area for the most part in that or those early October seasons, and even there in November, you'll start to see a little bit more variation. But specifically early there in October, you're going to be dealing with, in areas like Pennsylvania, um, you're going to be hunting ducks on, small creeks, bigger creeks, flooded, any sort of flooded agricultural ground or ponds, um, swamps, stuff like that. That's where you're going to find a lot of your ducks early on in the year, um, feeding in October, that early part of the year. And then as you move later into the middle part of the year in kind of November, early December, you'll see a shift in the types of ducks that you're going to be seeing, especially if it gets cold. You'll start to see more big ducks like your mallards and your black ducks start to show up, and you'll see them hitting the fields later in the day after sunset. Typically is what I found, unless it's super cold outside, then you'll see them hitting it earlier. But typically, I've usually see ducks hitting the fields late in the afternoon after sunset and early before sunrise during those times of the year. And so that goes right back to, finding those water spots that they're loafing on and hunting those during that time of the year. Or you could find them feeding in, flooded areas, swamps, um, flooded agricultural fields, ponds, that might have some grasses or some, seed plants on the edge of it, flooded areas that have grasses in it that, have that seed that they're going to be eating or trying to get those invertebrates that are up underneath those flooded areas as well. And then later in the year, into December, January, you'll start to see them feeding more on agricultural fields. You'll still see them feeding in those flooded areas all throughout the year, pretty much. But as the year goes on, you'll see them start to key in on those grain fields more than you would earlier on in the year. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that covers it pretty well.
Blind types. So we have panel blinds and layout blinds in the photo there. Top one's a panel blinds, and as you can see, we were in a flooded area that we were hunting with those. So those are great to take in any situation. Really, you can put them on an edge and hunt in a field. You can take them into a flooded situation in water and just plop that down and have a mobile hunting station for you to hide behind in flooded situations. Versus where in a layout line you're kind of handcuffed to hunting areas with dry land, and you may be able to hunt areas around water that have dry land around it, but you might not be able to get all the way out into that flooded area where they might want to be versus when you're using a panel blind or some sort of blind like that you can take into those deeper flooded areas and not have to worry about laying in the water. And then two good blinds to make on private land or natural blinds out of stuff that might be laying around, dead limbs or whatever, to use to your advantage. I would definitely talk to the landowner and the farmers to make sure that they're okay with you constructing either permanent blinds on their property or constructing natural blinds in an area. You don't want to put something somewhere where they might have to be coming in with equipment later in the day, and now you've just created a mess for them to have to deal with. So that's something to keep in mind too if you're making a natural blind on private land. And I know that that's something you're not allowed to do, not making natural blinds on public land. You're not allowed to cut any vegetation or any trees of certain age classes and stuff like that. So
Yeah, you also don't need a blind. You can just kind of hide in the cover. Particularly, that's what I often do when wood duck hunting because you're in a more wooded area. Just remember when you're hiding, the ducks are flying above you. Whether that's in a blind or if you're ducking into cover, ducks are flying above you. So your overhead cover is just as important as the cover that's right in front of you.
yeah, I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot is your overhead cover. You know, like you said, they're flying above you. So when you're calling, they get up above you and they're looking down for that, where that sound's coming from. They might pick you out if you don't have any overhead cover. And utilizing that natural vegetation, whether it might be trees or grasses, like you said, to hide behind. I find myself a lot when I hunt creeks and stuff like that and flooded areas, just getting back in the trees or something like that to use yourself to hide. That can be just as beneficial as having a panel blind or a layup blind, and then you don't have to go out and spend that kind of money on those blinds. You can hunt without one as long as you're concealing yourself properly. You'll be successful. Decoy setups on bodies of water. You're going to want to play the wind. The more open the area, the more you're going to have to play the wind. Open water and open fields, stuff like that, is where you're going to want to make sure you place your decoys in a formation that sets the ducks where you want them to go. So if you want the ducks to land in a certain spot, make sure you leave that spot for them to be open. And a good rule of thumb that I try and always go with is when you're setting decoys, you're setting your decoy spread to not allow the ducks or geese to go to a certain spot. So where I put my decoys is where I don't want the birds to be landing, and where the areas that I leave open for them and I'm not putting decoys is the places that I want them to be landing. So just kind of following that rule whenever I'm setting my decoys out is something that I always try and think of. Something that might be a little bit harder when you're on moving bodies of water, and playing the wind is a little bit tougher, because you're dealing with moving water, and decoys might be moving around. You kind of want to make sure you're setting your decoys up to where you're going to be able to retrieve those birds quickly when you're harvesting them on moving water, because as soon as they hit that water, depending upon how fast it's moving, they might get swept away pretty quick. So placing your decoys in an area that is going to get them as close as possible to the bank where the water is going to be usually the slowest is going to be much more beneficial to you in the long run.
And remember, ducks typically land into the wind.
Yes. And with that diagram there, you can kind of see how the decoy spread would be set up, usually in either a field or an open body of water. The wind direction coming from the back, and the ducks are going to be coming into your face. And then you can kind of utilize this in situations where you might be hunting a crosswind, whether it's coming from your left or right. You're going to want to make sure you set your decoys up in a way that stops them from going too far forward or going too far backwards and landing in that specific spot that you want them to go to. Hunting with a dog is very helpful, especially when you're duck hunting. Usually, like I've said numerous times in this that, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be hunting water. And sometimes, you're going to shoot ducks over water that is just too deep for you to get out there. And if you don't have a boat, whether that be, a boat that's got a motor on it, or a kayak or a canoe that you're going to paddle out and get those birds with, having a dog is something that's very important to have if you have that ability to purchase a dog and train them to be a waterfowl dog. That's a huge tool that opens up an enormous amount of places for you to end up going, because then you don't have to worry about, oh, if I shoot this duck out in the 6-7 feet of water, I can't walk out there and get it, and I don't have a boat to go out there and get it. Well, now I have to, you know, get them even closer. Well, now you have that ability to shoot a duck out there that, might still be within range, but is out there where you might not be able to get it because the water's too deep. Well, now you can send your dog out there and they can go get it for you. And they're much faster at getting a bird on water and on land than you're going to be. So that's another tool. But something to always, always, always keep in mind when you're hunting with a dog, especially when you're waterfowl hunting in situations like this. You're always going to run into a situation at some point in the year, usually during waterfowl season, where it's extremely cold. And knowing your dog's limitations and what you should and shouldn't be sending them out into weather condition wise is very important. And researching those telltale signs of a dog that might be headed downhill health wise on a super cold day where they're making water retrieves constantly. I've seen dogs completely shut down um, because of, a handler putting their dog in a situation that either the dog wasn't prepared for, or the dog just got burnt out from retrieving in cold water. I've had a situation myself where I've sent my dog on multiple retrieves in the water, and he came back and he just completely was almost just froze up on a day where the water was freezing around him. And you have to get yourself into a mindset of, my dog is more important, than that bird, and to get him warm or her warm, and to keep them in the right condition so that they can go out every time you need them to and make that retrieve. And you know not putting them in a situation that's going to cause harm to them. If there's anything else you want to add to
I think that
the
covered it.
dog. And two, I guess, is a good point of, there's a lot of breeds out there, a lot of dog breeds out there, and knowing the limitations of those specific breeds. Some are going to have a little bit more dense, fur than other ones are. And, the ones that don't have as much fur on them might not be a great idea to send them into super cold conditions versus a dog that's got a heavy coat later into the winter that's going to keep them warm. Something too I wanted to touch on is having your dog wearing a vest. Sometimes I've caught myself not putting my dog's vest on, and I kick myself every time I do that, because not only is that vest keeping the dog warm and helping him float, it's also possibly saving him from an injury. I can't tell you how many times I've sent my dog out and he's come back with slice marks on his vest from going under a barbed wire fence that I didn't see when he was going out to make a retrieve, or he's swimming in the water and he, cuts his vest on a big thorn or a branch, or there's a stick underneath the water that I don't see. And when I send him into the water and he hits the water, and he lands on that stick, that vest might just be enough to protect him from being punctured by a stick. Or even cattail and frag grass can be very sharp, and that can cut a dog or impale a dog. I've seen dogs paws when they landed on cattails that were underneath the water actually go through the dog's paws. So that's something to always be mindful of is that vest isn't there only for helping them stay warm and float, but also to protect them from other things that you may not even be thinking about. That's some field to table stuff. You can do this with all types of waterfowl. You can pluck the feathers off of the breast and cook the whole breast, or you can cut underneath the feathers and underneath the skin and expose the breast, and then just cut each individual breast off along the breastbone on each side, and peeling away and cutting the breast out. And then go online. There's tons of recipes out there for how to cook duck and how to make it taste good.
I think duck fat is delicious, but so plucking it is really nice, but it does take a lot of work. And just like if you haven't had it, my go-to is just medium rare with salt and pepper, and it's really good.
Yeah, definitely medium rare. The more you end up cooking a duck, a lot of people that say that, you know, they've had duck that's chewy or, you know, tastes like they're chewing on a boot, they've probably overcooked their duck. And that's the reason why, you know, you got to keep that duck at that medium rare, no more than medium temperature. Otherwise, you're going to get that, you know, leathery boot, chewy kind of feel to the bird. So that opens up our question portion of this. Let's see if we have any. If you want to go ahead, you can feed them into us, and
I'm gonna kind of yell so that everybody can hear me. So the first question that we got was in the beginning when we were talking about daily limit, bag limit, and possession. So Heather asked if you can clarify the difference between bag limit versus having 3 times the bag limit in possession. I do think it's probably important to clarify too, again, that daily limit and the difference between those 3.
Yeah. So again, daily limit is the number that you can harvest in a day. You can harvest up to 6 ducks, but there are certain species where you have a smaller daily limit. So we mentioned mallards. You can harvest 4 mallards, and only 2 of those can be hen mallards. So if you were to shoot 6 ducks, you can shoot 4 mallards, up to 2 hens, and then to get 6, you would need some other species. So it could be 2 wood ducks. So it's not, so if you look there, you can shoot 4 mallards and 3 wood ducks. You can't shoot 7 ducks. It's a combination of all ducks together. It can be 6. With certain species, you can only harvest a smaller number. For the possession limit, that's how many you can be holding at a time. So a good example of this is if you went for a week, decided to go on a hunting trip with your buddy, and you 3 days in a row shoot your limit. You have 18 ducks, and you can't go out and hunt anymore until you use up some of those ducks. So you need to have a feast if you want to go out the next day and go hunting on the 4th day. So that's what that possession is how many you can hold at once.
Heather also asked, what chokes do you both typically use?
I will. That goes back to patterning your shotgun. I've shot all kinds of different choke brands, and I've shot factory chokes. I have found out of my shotgun and the shells that I use that the factory full or the factory modified will throw just as good of a pattern or better than aftermarket choke tubes that are out there. That's something that I would say is huge to start out with. You know, there's no reason to go out and buy an aftermarket choke tube if you don't need to. Pattern your factory modified and your factory full and your factory improved cylinder choke tubes out of your shotgun that come with it. Those could end up throwing a much better pattern than any aftermarket choke tube that you may purchase. Two, you'll want to make sure to, if you're shooting a full choke, some full chokes are not rated for steel shot, and the manufacturer will actually specify that if the full choke is rated for steel shot or if it's not rated for steel shot. But the scenarios that you're going to find yourself into will also play into, what kind of choke tube you might want to shoot. If you're shooting ducks or geese in an area where that's, your shots are no more than 15 to 20 yards, you might be able to get away with shooting a modified, definitely, or even an improved choke tube where your pattern's a little bit more open. And that may actually be what you want to shoot in an area like that versus, a lot of people just only shoot a full choke, and then they get into situations where they're shooting ducks at 10, 15, 20 yards, and they're not hitting them like they do when they're shooting them at 20, 25, 30 to 40 yards like they do with their full choke. And they're wondering why. Well, that's because you're throwing a pattern at them that's the size of a softball at, 10, 15, 20 yards versus, where you let that choke open up a little bit more into a modified or an improved, and you'll actually see your success rate go up a little bit more when you're shooting at ducks at a much closer range.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So the thing I would add is when I'm wood duck hunting early season, I'll often find really small wetlands that I'll hunt wood ducks. So 15 yards is the max that I'm going to be shooting, 20 yards. These ducks are going to be coming down through the trees, moving very fast. So in that case, I do go to improved because I want a big pattern because of how those ducks are flying. But typically in a more open marsh setting where most of your shots are going to be 30 to 40 yards, that full or moderate is the ideal choke to go with.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do your research. If you want to shoot aftermarket choke tubes, there's some great brands out there that sell aftermarket chokes, and there's a ton of them out there. Do some research online, go on Facebook, and you can get down a rabbit hole if you do think about it too much. But pick a couple, pick 1, 2, 3 different choke brands and compare them to your factory choke tubes, and then decide which one throws the best pattern for you for for your gun and the shells that you're going to be using, and go with that. So,
and when it comes to individual choke tubes, I think the bigger impact is going to be your shooting ability. So if you're 3 feet off, it doesn't matter how good of a choke tube you're using, it's not going to help you. So practicing getting good at wing shooting is going to be the biggest help that you can have. And then once you become really good, then that specific choke tube can give you an even better improvement. But the biggest one's going to come from getting better at wing shooting.
Keith also asked if you can hunt out of a kayak.
Yes. So you can hunt out of any boat. One thing to keep in mind, you can't hunt while under the influence of a motor. So you can't shoot while the motor is on and running, but also if you're cruising across the lake, see some ducks, you can't just turn the motor off and take a shot. You got to wait for your momentum from that motor to come to a rest before you can legally hunt. But hunting out of kayaks is a great way to move around some small wetlands and utilize smaller bodies of water or even big.
Okay, and then Pramanash, I think he came in a little late. asked, can I shoot a duck that's flying over game lands before sunset? So there's a lot of stipulations there, but I mean, given the correct license is species, open species or legal species.
Yeah, if you're in, if it's duck season, the hunting hours for duck season end at sunset. So if you were hunting ducks legally licensed in the right season dates, yes, you can. Again, as we talked about before, keep in mind your shooting ability, the distance, and that kind of stuff. Don't really like to see people taking shots at 80 yards at a duck that's 80 yards in the air because you're unlikely to bring it down.
And you're not doing yourself any favors or anyone else that might be in the area hunting any favors, shooting at birds that are outside of your lethal range. So that's always something to keep in mind is, whether or not you can successfully make the shot that you're thinking about taking.
Yeah, and then also keep in mind safety zones, etc. So
Yep,
yeah.
knowing your surroundings and making sure that there's no one in the direction that you might, be shooting at ducks flying over you, or, a house or something like that. So.
Okay. I just kind of reached out. I saw that we had an individual who had their hand raised. So I was going to give it a second to see. I also see that we have Philip and Justin typing, so I'm just going to give it a minute.
Okay.
I did share the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Ducks at a Distance guide. Do you guys have any other recommendations on where people can find resources to help better identify ducks?
I think that Fish and Wildlife Service one that you shared, that's what I learned them on. It's very helpful. That Ducks at a Distance is very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's actually, you can get that like a hard copy too.
Yeah.
It's like a book that you can buy.
Mm-hmm. Any bird ID guide though
Yeah.
really covers ducks pretty well.
Yeah.
As well.
The more you get out there and the more you do it, the better you're going to become at identifying them, especially on the wing as well.
Philip adds here that the Lee Master method is
Yep.
also a great resource for duck ID.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if we will know this one or not. Does the Pima tuning restricted area require a boat, or can you get in with waders? Does it have blinds like the goose area?
I'm not familiar enough with Pima tuning to be able to say that. So what I would suggest is reach out to them, just give them a phone call, and they'll be able to give you all the information you need on that. And we can provide the phone number for Pima tuning later.
Does anybody else have any questions before we hop off? I'm just gonna write down Justin's information so that I can email it to him.
Trying to think if there's anything else we might have missed that'd be beneficial.
I guess going back to the species ID, having books is definitely helpful, but the best way to do it is to have those books and be out in the field. So look at a bunch of ducks and you're going to get better at it. So that's a practice makes perfect kind of situation.
Yep. Go to a local park or preserve or, stream or something like that. There's bound to be ducks there all times of the year. And, having that book with you, or, whether it's a hard copy or a digital on your phone, you can sit there and just kind of look at all the different species and be able to tell, at a close-up view, oh, hey, that's a mallard, or that's a black duck, or that's a wood duck, or that's a teal, stuff like that. Yes. Dog blinds, platforms is huge. I have 2 of them for my dog. One is specifically for field hunting. And then I have another one that has, say, it sits on a stand, and the bottom is like a mesh, kind of heavy duty mesh bottom. Um, if we're hunting water, that way I can get him up out of the water. That allows the dog to get up out of the water, get into the blind, be concealed, and then the water can drip off of him and drain out of the bottom, and it's not collecting in his blind, and he's not sitting in cold water the whole time that we're out hunting. So yes, a blind is great for a dog because typically they're going to be moving around a little bit more than a human would. But if you can keep them inside of a blind, and their head's going to be poking out and their tail's going to be wagging, and if that's all that's going on, that's a good thing for you. So I wouldn't worry about that. I haven't ever really run into a situation where I've found birds flaring off of my dog's head poking out of his blind. As long as he's properly concealed, I haven't really ran into anything that would want me to, keep my dog from being able to visualize what's going on. And that's going to help him too when he goes out to retrieve birds, being able to see the birds fall or see kind of what's going on. It's going to help he or she out when you send them out to go retrieve birds. And sometimes that can be a good warning for you too. Dog's eyes are much better than yours, and sometimes you're not going to be looking up in the sky. And can't tell you how many times I've been looking at my dog or looking at the ground, and all of a sudden I see him go like this, and I see him going like that with his eyes across the sky, and I look up and there's ducks flying. So sometimes that can be, having a dog is a good way to give you a little bit of a warning.
Okay. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before I close up?
Good luck and hunt
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It's a best way to train dogs. There's a lot out there on YouTube. There's a lot of books out there. Make sure you're learning from a reputable source. And the best advice that I could give to someone who's training their dog on their own is patience, because they will drive you nuts off the bat. Sometimes my dog still drives me nuts, but having patience is huge. And, especially a dog that wants to learn, they're going to pick it up quick, and they're there to please you, and they want to please you, and be able to do those things. Starting off simple, don't get too involved in training until you understand those basic obedience things, and your dog understands those basic obedience things: sit, stay, heel, all that stuff. That basic stuff is what you want to start with that as your foundation, and then work your way up into the more advanced things as your dog and you figure out how to put all that together, and how to understand when your dog figures out what you are trying to get it to do.
And many of these dogs, their instinct is to retrieve or to hunt. And so like really take advantage and enhance the natural instinct that dog is already going to be able to do and wanting to do.
Definitely. And that, to kind of piggyback off of that too, when you're out in the field and you're, hunting with your dog, and sometimes you might think your dog is going off course a little bit of where you may think the bird is. Just like you said, trust your dog, and trust, that dog, his natural instinct, or her natural instinct, is to hunt. And they're going to, once they figure out how to use their nose is much more better than where you thought a bird might be, because that bird could have hit the ground and he's 20 yards, 30 yards to the right or left, and you may send that dog out and he's going in the right direction, and they get to it and all of a sudden they're going off course. Let that dog hunt. Let it figure out what it's trying to do, because that duck or goose may still be right there in that same spot, but it's going to be beneficial to your dog in the long run to let it hunt when it gets to a spot, and let it figure out how to use the wind to its benefit, and figure out what sense it needs to be smelling when it's looking for a certain type of duck or goose that it's going after. I can't tell you how many times that I've been trying to redirect my dog into a certain area and he's trying to go another direction, and eventually I just let him do what he needed to do, and he ends up finding the bird in a totally different area and direction of where I had thought it was. So trusting your dog and being patient with your dog is something that's very important when you're training and hunting in those situations.
Okay. And that's one last question. And then
tagging your ducks
this is
for
what
transporting them. So you can I forget the name of the brand that it is, but there are yellow tags that you can buy. Toe tags. Yep, there it is. You can go on and buy them online. They're a yellow tag. It has on there species, sex, and quantity of the birds that you can write on there. And then you can tie them. I'll usually use like a zip tie, and I'll tie all those birds together and then tie that toe tag around the zip tie around all those birds. Or if you have all of your birds on a game strap, I'll tie that toe tag to the game strap. That way I'm legal, and if I get checked, a game warden can come up and he can look at that toe tag and know exactly what's there, and you're legal for transportation and all that good stuff. But if you don't use a tag for transporting them and you're with other people, they need to be separated. It's a good thing to separate them while you're transporting them, so that if you do get stopped by a game warden somewhere in between where you're hunting and where you're going to, it's easy to differentiate between whose are whose and what is what, and making sure that wing is still attached, if wing and head is still attached, if you field dress birds when you're going from one point to another. It's a federal regulation that you have to have at least one wing attached, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And even some, and it's even smart to have the head as well, just to be able to ID that bird a lot more better than if there's just a wing attached.
Okay. So before we hop off here, I just want to first say thank you to Ken and John for sharing their experience and knowledge with us today. We did record this program, and all of the registrants will be receiving a recording of it afterwards in a follow-up email. In that follow-up email, we'll also share other resources that might be valuable to help you get out duck hunting. If we didn't get to your question, or if you think of a question afterwards, you can always email us at mentoredhunting@pa.gov. And I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We hope this was helpful. And again, we'll send you that follow-up email. Okay. Have a good day.
Have a good
Bye,
one.
everyone.